There are a number of different ways to select color when painting in Adobe Photoshop. The first way that we're going to use is by taking a look at the color palette here in the top right of your screen, along with the swatches palette, which is nested underneath. It's important to note the difference between the foreground and background colors that exist that you see here in the color palette that are also replicated here on the left in your tool selection toolbar. You can always get back to this default black and white foreground background by hitting the letter D on your keyboard to return to default colors. You can also quickly swap between foreground and background colors by hitting this little arrow right here or hitting the letter X on your keyboard to exchange the foreground and background colors. To begin, I'm just going to paint a line across the screen with my brush tool selected. You'll notice that it comes in as a soft-edged black line because those are the settings shown up here in my brush tool, but it came out black because my foreground color is currently selected. We can tell that because it's the one on top, and it is set to black. Now, what if I want to paint in a different color? Well, the fastest way to do this is to jump over here to my color palette, select a color here from my hue strip. I'll select a kind of middle blue. I can adjust that color with the hue, saturation, or brightness sliders. Hue selects the color. Saturation selects how much of that color exists at any one moment, from no saturation, which is full gray, to full saturation, which is bright color, and then brightness, which shows how much light is shining in the color, so to speak. So we can go full black all the way to the brightest version of this hue and saturation possible. You can switch between different color spaces here in the hamburger menu. Say I can switch to RGB, which will allow me to select the actual red, green, and blue channel values. This is sometimes nice to work within since we are working in an RGB color space, as we can see here in our drawing title, though I tend to leave it in HSB just for simplicity's sake. So I can now click and paint a blue line, but I can also go back and using the X key, I can paint white lines through my existing color layer by swapping to my background color, which happened to be white. If I want to select a red, let's use a different method. I can double click on the foreground swatch here, and it will bring up the color picker, which gives me a hue strip similar to the hue strip here in the color palette, but then a full range where on left to right we are showing saturation and top to bottom we're showing brightness. I can click and drag around here to select a color that I'm happy with. Plus, looking down, I can see all of the different color numbers that would identify this color. Hue, saturation, brightness, red, green, and blue, lab color, and CMYK, which is what printers use. I'll just say OK. Now I'm going to tweak my color a little bit here until I get this little exclamation point. What this means here is that this color that I've selected is out of gamut. This color does not exist in the CMYK color space, but it does exist in the RGB color space that we are currently displaying. This means that if I plan on printing this project later, I will not get the red that displays on screen. The computer will have to interpret that red into something that the printer can generate, and I'll get a different color. So if you know that you're going to be printing your project, it's a good idea to click on this little yield sign here with the exclamation point in it, and your color will shift slightly into something that is replicatable in the CMYK color space. It's kind of a good practice to do regardless of whether you're printing or not, because you never know what the image purpose will be. You're probably going to end up printing some in your portfolio anyway. If you know you're just going to be displaying things in a digital format, in a screen-based format, it's okay to ignore that warning. But now I can click and draw a red line, and I can swap back to my original blue color since it was still there loaded in the background by hitting my X key, and I can paint with that blue. Now what happens if I want to select a green color now, but I know I'm going to want to get this blue color back later? This is where the swatches palette comes in handy. If I switch over to the swatches palette, we see a list across the top of all of the colors that I have selected most recently within this and in previous drawings. We have then a listing of color family groupings of commonly used swatches that you can use to begin work with. Also, we have some create a new swatch or delete swatch buttons here. So with the blue foreground button selected, I am going to click the Create New Swatch button. I'm going to name this Pastel Blue, and yes, I want to add it to my current library. I'll say OK, and notice how it adds this pastel blue down here, plus it opens the library palette, which I'm just going to go ahead and close. Here now I can select, let's say, a green, and if I hover over this green, it's telling me that this is CMYK green. I can also choose pure yellow green, and I can paint some lines. Then I can come back and choose, let's say, pure yellow orange, and paint some other lines. But then I can come back and grab my pastel blue color and draw again. Now there are a bunch of preloaded swatches that you can use, that you can grab here from your hamburger menu, such as Pantone colors, Toyo colors, True Match, Web Space colors. But more often than not, we're not going to use those. Instead, we're going to grab some colors from the web, from some pre-made color libraries that may come in handy. In my window menu, under Extensions, there's the Adobe Color Themes palette. If I open that, this gives me a link to the Adobe Color website, which is spelled K-U-L-E-R. Now I'm just going to delete all of the colors on my current layer, and I'm going to choose Create here to create a new color theme. Using this, I can grab any color on the wheel and drag it around, and you'll notice it gives me, in this current case, analogous colors. I can come through here as well and change some different active colors. I can add things directly to my swatches library, or I can change the color rule, where currently we are in analogous. Often for drawings, we might want to be in complementary or compound colors. So if I drag this around to grab a blue, it's going to give me close shades here that I can use to supplant that blue, or it's going to give me opposite shades on the color wheel here that I can use to contrast that blue. This comes in really nice for portfolio design as well as in rendering, because in landscape architecture you end up with a whole lot of green colors on a rendering, and you want to make sure that the drawing doesn't end up too monochromatic. So if I have some bright lawn green here, I can use these colors for trees, flower beds, cars, people, and so forth to provide pops of color and contrast into my drawing. If I want to load these quickly, I can just click this button here and add to swatches. And if we look in my swatches palette, it grabs that color library listed right here for me. I can also choose to use sliders here, just like we have been in Photoshop, and we can adjust the hue, saturation, and brightness, and it will provide base color and, in this case, compound colors as well. Let's say you want to have a variety of shades to create a layered background. I might use the shades color here. Triad is another quite common one that we use, where I'll drag these out a little bit in order to give myself 3 color libraries or color families to work within. These here should now provide everything you need to properly select color and paint in Photoshop.